and welcome again to another Seekers of Meaning, the podcast arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm Rabbi Richard Address, the director of Jewish Sacred Aging and the host of these podcasts. Welcome and thank you very, very much for joining us again. These podcasts, as many of you know, are designed to explore issues related to our own aging and the implications of longevity for our families and community. We welcome your comments. You can address them to me, Rabbi Address, at jewishsacredaging.com. And we'd also encourage you to go to the Jewish Sacred Aging Facebook page to like it and to get ongoing articles and opinions drawn from a whole variety of sources. Speaking of a new source, we want to welcome Connie Zweig to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning. Connie, welcome. She is the author of The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. This is a publication that's going to be with us starting in September, right around perfect. It's a perfect gift for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's available for pre-order now through, of course, the great God, Amazon. So, Connie, welcome. Welcome. It's nice to see you.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Rabbi Richard.
I'm very happy to see you. I'm very happy to, and it's always good to connect with somebody from my old neighborhood out in LA. And I hope you're gunning through the drought because when we're recording this, it's a very, very bad climate situation out in California. So I hope you're well and staying healthy. So Connie, I guess the easiest way to start this conversation, you write in the book that we are aging without a map, which is a great line. How did that impact you for writing the book? Is that why you wrote the book? Because we're without a map, there's no guidepost?
Yes. I experienced that myself as I approached my late 60s and I started to contemplate retirement from my clinical practice. And I noticed that I was starting to feel disoriented, and it surprised me because I've done so much inner work for so long, meditation and psychology. And so I thought, is there such a thing as a late life identity crisis? I haven't really heard anything about that. And who am I if I'm not the shadow expert? If I really let that go, who am I? And so that perennial spiritual question came up for me again and kind of took me by surprise. So I began to read and research, since that's just my nature, and go through all of the aging literature, the books about conscious aging, the teachings, the videos and podcasts about it. And I realized that there was no one talking about depth psychology and aging, meaning an orientation to the unconscious or the shadow. And there was no one really talking about spirituality in the way that I live it in the context of aging. So I thought, oh my God, maybe I haven't written my last book. Maybe there's a contribution for me to make here. Eventually, I found my way to Saging International and did a year-long training to become an elder. And it was a really profound initiation for me. But at the same time, it didn't have any depth psychology or orientation to the unconscious. So that kind of reinforced my motivation to write. And when I started teaching workshops about this, Richard, I discovered that many, many people felt the same disorientation. People seemed to feel regret about the past and could not imagine a future, a lot of fear about illness and deterioration and loss, isolation, no connection to a tribe, and didn't know how to find a spiritual practice or a contemplative practice that fit with this stage of life. So I began to see several things. I began to see that this was a rite of passage. And we've all been through rites of passages before. We've been through bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs. We've been through graduations. We've been through birthdays, the Medicare birthday. We've been through christenings, many different kinds of rites of passage. But there is none in our culture to become an elder. It existed in indigenous cultures, that right, but it doesn't exist in contemporary Western civilization. So that was the first kind of thing that I noticed, was that it's a rite of passage. And what does that mean? It means 3 steps: letting go, stepping into uncertainty or liminal time, and emerging renewed, in this case as an elder. And so that's kind of the frame for the book.
Could you talk to me about you, because you just alluded to this, your your definition of spirituality? You said there's about, well, you go ahead. I mean, because you alluded to that, what your practice of your own type of spirituality. What is, if you could share that, what is that?
So I don't typically talk about this, but I was raised in a Jewish family, but it was very secular humanist. It really wasn't about connecting to the divine or the transcendent in any way. I mean, that just was not a part of my parents' world, as is common now in the Jewish community, the Reformed Jewish community.
Yeah, we're very familiar with that.
Yeah, right. Um, Although, Reb Zalman Schachter, who founded Saging International and Jewish Renewal, was this incredible spiritual figure. So when I was 18, I went to college in Berkeley, and at 19, I started transcendental meditation. And this whole other world opened up to me about transcendence, about the capacity of the human nervous system to silence the mind, experience profound, pure awareness without thought, and connect to something larger than ourselves, larger than our bodies and minds and egos. So I grew out of TM after a few years, but I explored other practices in the Indian Vedanta tradition. So I have 2 lineages: depth psychology from Carl Jung and my work on the shadow, and Vedanta, Indian philosophy, which has stayed with me now for 50 years. And my experiences of spiritual development have really been crucial to the meaning and purpose of my life. And I find as I age, and this became so important to the book, because I find that, as we age, the hits just keep coming. The physical, emotional, existential hits, they don't stop. But if we have a refuge where we can go daily and actually center ourselves and sit in silence, which I call pure awareness, and feel rejuvenated from the day, it makes all the difference in the world. It gives us an orientation, it gives us a GPS internally for how we manage the aging process. And that's why I like to say we can do aging as a spiritual practice.
Well, actually, in my work, in the Jewish sacred aging work, as I go around to congregations and do a lot of teaching, I'm finding more and more of our generation who have experienced going into or continuing a meditation practice. And when I push them on this, because it's not something from how I was raised, in a typical suburban Philadelphia environment, a lot of people who are doing this say, they'll say, Richie, this helps me not only physically, internally, biochemically, but spiritually. And I'm in touch with stuff that I really just ignored when I was building a family or building my career. So it's fascinating that you're coming at from also that perspective. Rick Moody writes the foreword to the book, and he has this wonderful quote that I wanted to ask you about. He says the book is organized, quote, around the unconscious inner obstacles that block our capacity to fulfill the extraordinary possibilities of late life, unquote. And I know Rick, because he's done some stuff with us. Walk me through that quote, because that quote is a high holiday sermon. it's like really,
beautiful.
it's really meaty. So walk me through that quote. The unconscious inner obstacles that block our capacity for the extraordinary possibilities of late life. What does that mean?
Beautiful. Okay, so it seems to have been my fate to be the shadow expert. And I don't know how this happened. In 1989, I compiled an anthology called Meeting the Shadow. And it sold so many books that I realized there was a need there in people. And so several other books about the shadow followed that over the years. And my initial concept for this new book was Meeting the Shadows of Age. But the publishers didn't want that. So hence the inner work of age. But the book is organized around these unconscious inner obstacles, which are shadows. In other words, they are parts of us that are outside of our awareness. Let me give you an example. If we deny that we are aging in this youth-centric culture, if we are continuing to push ourselves all day long, like we did in midlife, or if we feel shame about how we look with our wrinkles or our gray hair, if we are so attached to the old self-image or the old style of doing that we're actually denying reality as it is, then there's a shadow figure in us that I call the inner ageist. And the inner ageist has internalized the ageism of society, which is epidemic.
Right.
However, however, the aging community really only talks about institutional ageism in the social, economic, political world. I'm talking about internalized ageism from the inside out. And it turns out there's a researcher at Yale, a psychologist named Becca Levy, who has spent her whole career studying the consequences of internalized ageism on our physical health, our brain health, our emotional health, even our longevity. And it has devastating consequences. So the first chapter of the book is about this first inner obstacle, which is really, how do we break through denial? How do we become aware of this inner ageist and work through it so that we feel self-acceptance? We feel pride that we've lived a long life. We feel gratitude for who we are now. So that's the first inner obstacle. What I realized at a certain process in the writing was that there are about 8 inner obstacles, and out of them arise 8 developmental tasks to become an elder. So getting through the inner ageist, breaking through denial, is a developmental task, because if we're in our 70s and we're still striving to be young, youthful, if we're still living midlife values, then we can't become an elder. We can't cross the threshold from that rite of passage and complete that process to step into elderhood. So the book is built around those obstacles and those tasks. Yeah?
Connie, talk to me about the role of fear. What are we afraid of?
So some fear is conscious, right? We might be aware that we're afraid of getting sick or losing our spouse, or we might be afraid of all kinds of things that we're aware of. But there are deeper unconscious fears about aging that are a central part of stopping us from doing what we need to do. So if I use retirement as an example, um, and to retire or not to retire, to paraphrase Shakespeare, this question comes up for all of us, for those of us who can afford to retire, who have the privilege of stopping paid work. So what I discovered in all my interviews is that we project our unconscious fears onto retirement like a Rorschach test. So what I mean by that is some people project freedom, leisure, carefree life. Other people project onto retirement, what will I do now? I'll become useless. I'll become irrelevant, invisible. Those fears don't tend to be conscious. They tend to be in the shadow, in the unconscious, not spoken about. But the consequences of that is that when it's really time to slow down for self-reflection, when it's time to change gears, perhaps do something else, or perhaps just take a break and step into the liminal time, those fears stop us from that. They keep us from fulfilling the possibilities of this transition.
So,
And there are many, many, yeah, go
no,
ahead.
go ahead, finish. No, finish.
Well, I was just going to finish with Rick Moody's quote. So he
Yeah.
talked about the extraordinary possibilities for this time. So my literary agent retired last year, the woman who sold all my books, and she's painting full time. And she said to me, I never knew I was an artist. I had no idea. Somebody else is learning 2 instruments and said to me, I never knew I was a musician. I had to work to support my family. I had no idea. Other people can spend more time with their grandkids. Other people become mentors. Other people launch new ventures of all kinds. So, and some people are devoted to their spirituality at this time. You know, most of the religious and spiritual traditions, as you know, really look at this stage of life as the time for letting go and moving into contemplation in our relationship with God. So we miss all that if we actually can't slow down and take a breath and contemplate what's next. I think that's what he meant.
And of course, one of the things you alluded to and touched on, which has become present as a result of the pandemic, is not everybody can, quote, afford to do this. And that's really one of the inequalities that have been laid bare through the pandemic. That for in large part, what I'm seeing is that many of our generation have weathered this pandemic quite well, because they've had the economic and communal support to do that because they could afford it. And yet, and that's really, I think, one of the spiritual, moral, ethical, social justice questions that's going to really hit society here. That the gap is growing, not shrinking in the United States around, especially with the explosion of the aging of the baby boomers. You write in the book about the divine messengers of age, quote, the divine messengers of age. Could you tell me what a couple of those divine messengers are?
Well, let me say one thing first about the inequality that we see now that became more visible. It was always there, but the economic and racial inequity that's more visible now. Even people who don't have the resources to retire from paid work can still do inner work. They can still find 20 minutes to meditate. They can still find time to read and contemplate their next steps. So, and what I found in working with people who don't have a lot of resources is that they experience what I experience with meditation, which is that it's a refuge. It gives them a profound break from the stress and the struggle that they're under. So, the divine messengers, that term comes from a story about Siddhartha the Buddha. And his story, which is well known, about leaving the palace. He was a prince. And as a young man, he'd never been out of his father's palace. And he asked his charioteer to take him out. And once they were in the streets, he saw illness for the first time, people who were sick. He saw people who were bent and gray, people who were old. And he saw death. And those were the divine messengers for him. And then he saw a monk. And then he realized that there was actually a means to go beyond the suffering. That's what Buddhism teaches. That there was a means, that there was a practice, that there was a community to, not to be rid of illness, age, and death, but to relate to them differently. Because we can't eliminate them, but to relate to them differently, to put them in a different framework. Now, for me, there are more divine messengers than those three. I see retirement as a divine messenger because it can lead to the same wake up call in our time. I also see, and I also have a chapter on illness because of its power to do that. And there are others as well. So I didn't stick to just the three in Buddhism, but the main point is that they can wake us up to the promise of this transition if we allow them to.
Yeah, I think that's a key. If I'm reminded as you're speaking of the Jacob's ladder story from Genesis, who he wakes up and says, "Oh, God was in this place, but I never knew it." And in like the burning bush story in Moses, these divine messengers, I would assume, or I would are always there. But it takes a certain moment in our life to realize, aha, I'm getting this. And you've talked to people, I've talked to people, say, well, I got all of a sudden I was getting this message. Yeah, I said, yeah, the message was always there, but you may not at 35 raising a family and trying to figure out may not have heard that message. When you're 75 and figuring something else out, yeah, that's all of a sudden it's coming in loud and clear.
Right.
I want to ask you a couple of just before we start running out of time. In your experience, and you're writing the book, and is your work in this field, how different of an approach to this whole inner work of aging, from shifting from role to soul, is there in the differences of perception between men and women?
I didn't explore gender differences. It's sort of
Okay.
just not where I live. I mean, people have asked me that, but it's just not where I've focused my research. So the one thing that came up that was kind of clear in the interviews was that women have more attachment, a harder time letting go of self-image, physical self-image. And men have a harder time letting go of their self-esteem around work.
Work, right.
But, and being a provider. But, those are generalizations, and I'm just not big on generalizations. I mean, those are not true for me. So that kind of rule is not true for me, and that's kind of why I never went down that road of gender differences. I think there's a story for the Jewish audience that we're sharing this with here. There's a story about Moses at the end of his life when he's not allowed to cross over into the promised land. And I see that beautiful, powerful story as very significant for us in late life to contemplate. For me, it's about life completion. So, one of the reasons that we do this inner work is that we're facing a shortened time horizon. And as we allow mortality awareness to really penetrate us, we can contemplate, what do we need for life completion? What do I as an individual need to complete? Is there emotional unfinished business? Someone I need to reconcile with, someone I need to forgive, someone who needs to forgive me? Is there spiritual unfinished business? Do I need to update my beliefs about life and death and God? Do I need to update my images of the divine, which tend to be very unconscious? Some people are still living with their childhood image of God, and it can be an inner obstacle. And do I need to update my spiritual practices? So asking that question in the context of the story of Moses, was he fulfilled because he was able to pass the baton to Joshua? He knew that the work would be carried on. He knew that his community was crossing over. Or was he angry at God? Was he outraged? Was he disappointed, heartbroken? And I think part of the way that we look at that story can give us information about how to complete our own lives and to ask the question, what is the promised land for you? What does that bring up for you? And can you complete your life fulfilled without reaching the promised land?
Well, I mean, just on Moses, there's this wonderful midrash on exactly the text that you're talking about, where he really argues with God. They go at it one on one, and he bargains, and and he doesn't want to die. He is unfully, and it didn't finish. He doesn't want to die until finally there's this wonderful moment of acceptance, and the midrash ends. It's a very famous midrash that just about every one of my colleagues has preached on, but he ends with a kiss. God kisses him, takes and literally takes the breath. So, which is very human. This is very, very human midrash. I don't want until finally, okay, I really I'm there. It's that acceptance. You alluded to something else in just before, an idea that I just wanted to bounce off of you, because in the work that we're doing in Jewish Sacred Aging, and in the classes that we run and the workshops that we do, the issue of time has just overwhelmed a lot of these conversations. Not only the fact that many people have said, I lost a year and a half of my life, and at this stage of my life, it's a real year and a half. It's not like I'm 30. But the idea of time being the real spiritual question for us as we get older, and the question of, okay, what do I do with it? In your research for preparing the book, and again, the book is called The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. Did you run across these conversations about time, and my reflections about time, my regrets about time, my list still looking forward to more time?
Yes, definitely. And people have very different subjective experiences of time passing. So some people may be stuck in the past, reminiscing, nostalgic, wishing they were back there, not only being young, but being more active or more whatever. Some people cannot imagine the future because they're stuck in the past. Some people look at the shortened time horizon and deny it. Someone said to me yesterday, I'm 66. I have plenty of time. I don't want to think about this. So there are, and also there's some research out of Stanford about this, that when people in late life accept that they've lived the majority of time that they're allotted, the most pressing concern that comes up is emotional reconciliation. This is Laura Karstensen at Stanford University. That the priority for people is not only being with loved ones, but clearing the space, completing the business, saying the unsaid things. So, I think time has a different impact on different people. For me, time passes much more quickly now. A month feels like a day to me. A month feels like a day to me. And I don't at all feel that I wasted the year and a half of the pandemic. I used it really well. So I don't have that frame of wasted time. I was my husband and I were both at home. We had a really good time together and we used it very creatively. So I think that one of the inner obstacles is denial of mortality awareness.
Right.
And what that does is it actually rips us off from living fully now in the context of impending death. Because if we leave off that last part and we feel like we're going to live forever, we might lose that year and a half in the pandemic. We will relate to time differently if we feel like it's, ad infinitum.
And you write about what you call the mortality awareness in the book, and raise these issues. And as I was reading that, I was thinking, because in the work we do, we always relate a lot of stuff to text, because that's the way we teach us text as an entry point. But it's really Genesis chapter 3, which is the biblical author's attempt to deal with exactly what you write about in the mortality awareness, because that's the chapter where so you're going to die, and this is what it is. So, Connie, I want to thank you very much. The book is so layered and in so many ways of things to talk about. I can see a lot of people using this as a text themselves for conversations, book clubs, adult education. So I wish you continued success with this as it emerges in public. Are you going to put this on your website? I mean, are people going to be able to access parts of this? Do you have your own website that talks about your
Yes,
work? What is it? What is it?
my website is conniezweig.com. And I've also blogged excerpts of the book on Medium under my name. And I also have a YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
So if people want to get in touch with me, I also have a LinkedIn page so people can get in touch with me. I'm very grateful to you. I'm grateful for what you're doing in your work.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
I'm grateful for this time that we had together. It's really precious.
Well, I appreciate it, and again, I recommend the book as it comes out in September, and we'll revisit that then. So just good luck with your move. Good luck with everything. Stay healthy. Say hello to Topanga Canyon for me, and
Thank you.
There used to be some really funky stores on the way down the drive back to the
They're
Pacific
still
Coast.
there.
Are they still there?
Still there.
Some very interesting people used to hang out around there with some really
Yeah.
interesting motorcycles. But I'm going back a couple of years. But anyway, thank you. Thank you very much. Again, the book is The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul by Connie Zweig, being published in September. And we'll revisit it after around the holidays. It could make a great Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur gift for somebody for Sukkot, something to read in the Sukkah. To all of you, I want to thank you again for joining us here on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV show and podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. Remember, we're available to you on the streaming service called Roku. If you would like to make a tax-free donation to help support our work in these podcasts, go to the homepage, jewishsacredaging.com, click on the donate button, and you'll just follow the prompts. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubekin Media Corporation in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out, as usual, to the tech genius, our producer, Steve Lubetkin. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I look forward to greeting you on our next Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast. Until then, take care, stay safe, be careful, stay healthy. Shalom.